Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Global Lawyer. I'm Marina, your host. This podcast is an initiative of the São Paulo Lawyers Institute, one of the most traditional legal institutions in Brazil. Since 1874, IASP has championed the cause of lawyers, consistently pushing the boundaries with forward-thinking debates, actions, and ventures. So crossing borders through language is now more important than ever. And this podcast aims to strengthen our profession in an atmosphere where Brazilian lawyers interact, engage with foreign peers, and become visible globally. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome our guest, Professor Bruno Salama, who has an incredible journey in the legal field. He started his career in Brazil, then he moved to the United States, where he first obtained an LL.M, then a PhD from Berkeley. He practiced in many areas and is now a respected law professor at Berkeley, where he teaches law and economics, monetary law and regulation, and among other subjects. And he also teaches at FGV São Paulo. And he practices law at Salama Silva Filho Advogados. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome, Professor. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's start, from the beginning. Can you tell us about your early career in Brazil? What initially drew you to the field of law, and what were some of the formative experiences you had during those early years?
So there are no lawyers in my family. I didn't grow up amongst lawyers or judges or anybody in the legal field. My dad is an engineer, and I think as a teenager I wanted to be like him, and I was planning on studying engineering. But then in the last year of my high school, I took an aptitude test, a career aptitude test, teste vocacional.
Mm-hmm.
And law turned out to be a complete outlier, kind of way above everything else. And so I started to think about it. I remember my uncle took me to talk to a lawyer that was a friend of his. And then I was hooked by it, and I decided that I was going to go to law school. But law school, in the beginning at least, felt a bit like high school. I was studying in the morning, and I was just a full-time student. And I think that the decisive experience in my formative years was my estágio, my internship, which I started when I was in my second year. Because then I had to do serious work, and I had serious commitments, and I had clients, and I had a time to arrive and a time to leave, although not always a time to leave. Sometimes it could get busier. And I worked with several attorneys, and from each one of them, they were excellent people. And from each one of them, I tried to learn something. And if I had to point out to one activity or experience that was memorable from those years, I think it was drafting the timesheets. Because the timesheet, you finish your day, and I don't remember exactly how many hours I was expected to put in every day, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. But when you write your timesheet at the end of the day, then you're forced to face what you accomplished in that day. What did you really do today?
Very interesting. Yes.
Yes. And so while timesheets are much more irregular today, my clients sometimes pay me by the hour, but most of them don't. But I think I still have this internal timesheet. When I finish a day, I feel like I often ask myself, what did I really do today? What did I accomplish today?
This is great. Very, very, very interesting indeed. And when you moved from Brazil to the US, so you had this experience here in Brazil, it was in São Paulo, right?
Yes.
And then you moved to the US. What motivated you to pursue further education in the United States, and how did you find the transition, both professionally and personally? Tell us.
Well, that's obviously a big question, but
Mm,
the summary is more or less like this. This transition did not happen at once. It was really a process. In
mm.
2003, I wanted to do an LLM, and I ended up in Berkeley a little bit by chance
Oh.
because the LLMs are expensive. And I realized that if I had a research plan, maybe I could apply for a scholarship to write a dissertation and so on. And Berkeley
Mm.
turned out to be the only school that thought that my research plan merited any kind of attention. So I got
Wow.
accepted here with a tuition waiver. And then once I was here, I had to write my dissertation, and then I found an
Mm-hmm.
advisor and so on. And my advisor, I think he liked what I wrote, and he told me that I had a knack for it. And I
Mm.
enjoyed doing it. And so it was a little bit of a discovered vocation or something like that. But that
Nice.
wasn't yet when I completed a transition to the US,
Mm-hmm.
because when I finished my LLM, I wanted to practice law. And so I went to New York and I worked for a reputable firm there.
Mm.
And again, I had the privilege of working with great lawyers, people with whom I learned a great deal. But I still wanted to continue or pursue this academic life. And so I came
Mm.
back to Berkeley to do a doctorate.
Wow.
And when I finished, my idea was to stay here in the U.S.
Mm.
And as soon as I finished my doctorate, my idea was to look for the job market here uh, in academia, right? Look for a
Mm-hmm.
professorship or a place to teach and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
then FIGV at that point was opening its law school, and one thing
Mm.
led to the other, and I
Yeah.
ended up going back to Brazil, where I taught for a decade. And then a
Wow.
decade later, I had the opportunity to come and teach here at Berkeley. And so I moved
Mm.
back to the US. That was more the transition. But
I
that
see.
at that point, I really had too much already going on in Brazil. So I moved here, but I continue to have, a significant part of my professional life in Brazil.
You have the law firm.
Yes, the law firm, and I'm still a professor of law
At,
at FGV. I
mm-hmm.
teach remotely, but not really. So FGV is
Yes, tell
creating
us about
now.
that.
FGV is creating now a doctoral program, and I'll be teaching at the doctoral program, but it's going to be hybrid because I'll be teaching from here most of my classes, and
Mm-hmm.
a younger assistant professor or something like that, a guest
Mm-hmm.
professor, will be with the students live, and so that's the next
That's
thing that
very
we're
nice.
doing over there. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And I see your career has it spans multiple continents and sectors from what I've seen. So could you share some of the key challenges you faced, not only when transitioning from practicing law in Brazil to teaching and practicing in the US, but also in terms of influence? What influenced your decision not to move from private practice to government, but you have a lot of experience in several areas. So tell us about it.
So, in terms of influence, my parents never expected that I would be an academic. I don't even think that they ever liked it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many academics in my mom's family. She was
Mm.
at some point a linguistics professor at PUC Campinas, and
Uh-huh.
maybe somehow that created an influence. There are a lot of chemists and pharmacologists in her family,
Mm.
and so that might have played out kind of in the back of my mind, but it was
Right.
really a process that I was most of the time just developing it myself. I think a relevant passage is when I set myself to write a doctoral dissertation here, right, a doutorado, I decided that I wasn't going to talk about Brazil because it has always seemed to me very artificial that a person comes, goes to Germany or France or US or wherever to discuss its own law. Since, the professors, what does a French professor know about the law in Brazil? Not so much, right?
Yes.
Just to give an example, or an
Right.
American professor for that matter. And so I felt that I should come here and not talk about Brazil. And so I promised myself that the word Brazil would not appear in my doctorate dissertation, kind of to discipline me, not because I didn't want to talk about Brazil. On the contrary, I've always been interested and I've always written about it. But I just wanted to set this discipline for me that I was gonna come here and play on their league and talk about their things and their and their law, as opposed to being, this kind of artificial situation that we often see.
Right. And it was basically a strategic choice,
It
right?
was a strategy. Yes, it was a conscious decision that I
very
wanted
smart,
to
I have
be.
to say.
Well, it was like that's something that is a goal that I set to myself. I think it's no secret that Americans, and for that matter, Germans or French or maybe Portuguese not, but most scholars worldwide, they're interested in theory, or they're in abstract thinking and so on, or they're interested in their own laws. But you'd be hard pressed to find people here that are interested in the intricacies of Brazilian law or Brazilian courts and so on. So that was from the get-go very clear to me. At the same time, I've always been interested in writing about Brazil and thinking about Brazil and talking about Brazil. And so that was always the challenge I think maybe the main challenge in my, let's say, my professional life was finding the right balance between Brazil and not Brazil. And so in the end, what I ended up doing is, for the most part, I write about Brazilian law in Portuguese. And when I write in English, maybe Brazil will be an example here and there, but I won't be, discussing Brazil per se. That I think was the, kind of the solution I found to combining my interest in Brazil and in other things as well.
And I think it works. It's working.
Yeah.
And yes, later on, I'm going to ask you about but before talking about your teaching experience, the government, the role of the government during your time in your, you have been in the National Financial System Appeals Council. It's in Brazil, Conselhinho, right?
That's right.
So
hard to translate.
Yeah.
I think you got it.
Yeah,
that's a good one. I like your translation.
Okay. So what were the most significant cases or issues you had to deal with at that time? How did this experience shaped your approach to legal practice and afterwards on teaching?
I mean, it's a very rich experience to be in Brasilia, to see how it goes and so on. And there are just a lot of things that I learned. I think if I could mention two, the first two most memorable things for me. The first is the first cases that we decided when I joined the Conselhinho in the year of maybe 2015 or 14, maybe 13 or 14, something like that. So we had a bunch of cases that had started during the privatization of the bancos estaduais, the state-owned banks. And there were, accusations against the administrators of those banks. And the laws are tailored for private banks for the most part, right? The
Right.
lei das SAs,
Uhum.
and the securities laws, the lei do mercado de
Mercado de capitais.
capitais. Yeah, those laws, they establish fiduciary duties for the managers, for the
Uhum.
administrators, but they are not really tailored for the public sector.
Yeah.
And it was just I could I could I could just I had to resolve on these cases, but at the same time, you could read between the lines just the drama
Hum.
faced by these people who were in the shoes of having to run state-owned banks in the 80s and 90s
Wow,
when
yes.
the financial system
It
was
was
at some
crazy.
points collapsing, crazy
Uhum.
inflation, all sorts of political pressures, the
Yes.
states themselves being close to insolvency. And
Right.
so those cases they were just really hard cases.
Mm.
And I just almost I could feel the difficulty not only
Mm.
of deciding the cases, but also the difficulties faced by those people who were being accused back then. So
Uhum.
that was memorable to me.
Yeah.
And the other memorable thing is that I got to meet this elite of the federal civil servant body in
Mm.
Brazil, a elite do
Uhum.
funcionalismo federal, which
Uhum.
I had previously had almost no no experience with.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed by these people, highly prepared,
Uhum.
motivated, competent. And so that
That's
was
great.
really memorable because it was just marvelous to find those kinds of people,
Uhum.
and so that's also another memorable passage, I think.
No, this is great. It's a great time you've had up there. Up there, I mean, in Brasilia, for you
Right,
down there.
that's right.
And you've served as a consultant for the World Bank, and you held
Right.
other advisory positions, right? So,
Yeah.
how do these roles differ from your work in academia and private practice? What unique insights have you gained from these experiences?
I think in academia, particularly when you're teaching, you have to share your opinions, your views with people, try to impart your knowledge. You also want to, help people develop their abilities to think and to write and so on. But a lot of it is you're just, sharing what you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the advisory roles, uh, I found myself listening a lot. So, for example, when I wrote a report for the World Bank commissioned a report that I wrote with two other World Bank lawyers, Danilo
Mm-hmm.
Palermo and Eva Gutierrez. And so we wrote together a report with best practices for dealing with insolvent state owned banks, right? And so you have to come up with a policy that basically says or sets guidelines for how governments worldwide have to deal with their insolvent state-owned banks. And the
Mm.
world's a pretty big place.
Yes.
There's Asia, there's Africa, there's Europe, and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And so, how do you go about thinking about the best practices for that?
Yes.
And
Wow.
so, I feel like most of my work was just calling people and
Mm.
then asking them, can you spare 30 minutes with me and tell me about your experiences and what you've seen and so on? And then you
Mm-hmm.
have to bring it all together. My advisory roles in private companies, I was a I was a board member of it's I don't think it's still a startup, but it was once a startup called
Mm-hmm.
Eduki Bank, which was
Mm-hmm.
uh, a company in this education financing space. And then a lot of it sitting in the board is really listening and listening
Yes.
and listening. And then
Oh, definitely.
you
Uh-huh.
try to add something. And so it's very different, I think, from the other roles that I have had in my life.
Very nice, very nice. Yes, and there is also the teaching aspect, which is so important in your career. So, teaching across cultures, Professor, teaching at prestigious institutions like UC Berkeley and FGV Law School, as well as being a visiting professor in China and New York. How do you adapt your teaching methods to cater to diverse student bodies and legal environments, not to mention the language implications? I mean,
Yeah.
would you say that language played an influential role there among all the others?
I mean, so there's again a lot here. The culture is different. The academic culture. I don't know if academic culture is the best formulation. Maybe the teaching culture, the environment inside, in
Mm-hmm.
the teaching space is different in different places, quite obviously.
Because they reflect their
And
realities, yes.
they reflect the realities in place and the cultures, I mean, the Chinese students and the American
Yes,
students
okay.
and the Brazilian students, they are not like one another,
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
generally, right, as a
Right.
generalization, but it's true, and it's easy to feel the differences.
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, but maybe, as a starting point, I think I start from the premise that the teaching, I just said, you're imparting your knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, it's not only about imparting your knowledge, because it's also about creating a learning experience that's engaging. I mean, if you're very successful, even
Oh.
memorable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so and so you have to try to establish communication with the students. And over the years, when you're starting teaching, that was for me 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
you memorize your lectures, and I need to say this and I need to say that, and you want to make sure you finish your class and you say everything. And oftentimes, uh, what you plan for your class is everything you know about a certain topic. And then within time, you learn to slow down your teaching
Mm-hmm.
and let the students talk, and then try to figure out what they want to learn and what works best. And so teaching is really, really one of those activities where experience makes a major
Yes,
difference.
we learn a
Uh,
lot,
we
definitely.
learn over time how to teach. Obviously, this has to be true for anything, right? A lawyer that's just left law
Yes,
school,
of course.
is not going to be as good as a lawyer that's been out there for 10 years
Yes,
or
sure.
20 years,
Mm-hmm.
or even more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Experience matters a lot, but this is
Yes.
very clear. This is very clear when you're
Yes.
teaching. At the same time, you have to try to have an kind of let's say, an affable disposition towards the students
Mm-hmm.
and so on.
Yes.
But there's a very clear limit for that, because in the end you have to be professional. And
Yes.
so, right, and so, it's nice to be engaging and so on, but you're not their friend, you're not their buddy, you're
Yeah.
just you're there to you have a role to play,
Yes.
and you have to, you know, deliver
Yes, you
and
have to
then
deliver.
leave.
And that reminds me of the Socratic method. How do you deal with that? Because this is something very characteristic of the common law system.
Yeah.
Do you, how often do you resort to that, or how do you deal with this method
I'm
in
still
class?
learning it. I've been here in Berkeley for less than a decade,
Uh-huh.
and I'm still learning how to use Socratic method. And I don't think my classes are really Socratic. I try to make them
Mm.
participatory, and within time, I'm still in the learning process of how to be more Socratic. And
Okay,
it's a
and
nice thing to try to, you know learn a different style. It
yes,
doesn't come natural to me.
Mm,
The secret is that the opinions from the US Supreme Court and other
mm,
courts, they are going to have the opinion and the dissent,
the dissents.
right?
Yes,
And
they play a
so,
major role there.
exactly. And so the opinion and the dissent, you have that in Brazil, by the way, too, right?
Yes,
It's just
yes.
not, no, we just don't emphasize the dissent so much. Uh, but
But sometimes we do at postgraduate studies. Um,
right,
I
I mean,
mean,
we should, and I think we're increasingly, you know, when when I was in law school in the in the early 90s or mid 90s,
mm-hmm,
um, we would read manuais, right?
yes.
Textbooks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the role played by the courts, case law, was very limited in my recollection. I don't
Mm-hmm.
recall discussing, too many Supreme Court cases, one or maybe
Yes,
one or
you
two
are right.
here and there. Whereas nowadays, I think it's become very clear,
Yes.
especially in certain fields, let's say constitutional law, right? I
Mm-hmm,
mean, you have
yes.
to be insane to teach constitutional law today without thinking about how the Supreme Court is
Is
interpreting
it? Yes,
the
yes.
Constitution,
Yes, the
right?
Constitution is how it
But
is interpreted. Yeah.
right, but my constitutional law class, in law school in the 90s
Mm-hmm,
at Lago São Francisco,
mm-hmm.
I don't recall reading
Reading.
Supreme Court decisions. I mean, one, here and there, but it
Okay.
wasn't the main thing. Whereas I think that today it's become very
Yes.
common. I think
Yes.
every constitutional law professor anywhere, right,
Yes,
will
this is a must. Yes, I
it's
recall
a must.
I read
Exactly.
it a lot because my father used to give me and to assign them to me. He said he used to say, "Oh, you have to read that. You have to read this one, and you have to say how do if you agree or you don't agree." Because he said this is foundational. This is
Of
so
course.
important. But this we had
Yeah.
at the office. I was an intern, but you are right. And today it plays a major role in
Yeah.
academia now
I
in the
mean, I wasn't that lucky because, as I said, nobody in my family was a lawyer. So I was just, taking
yes.
the stuff that the professors were giving me at face value. But
Yes,
of course,
but yes,
what you were told is correct.
and about the Socratic method is interesting because it is interesting for the professor and for the students because the cold calls and when
Yeah,
they are called, each student has a reaction because sometimes they had already prepared, they have read the case, but they are not ready to speak, right?
right.
And
Yeah,
this is also a process that prepares for
right.
today's practice,
Yeah,
mostly.
I agree. Yes,
Litigation and arbitration. So you are a founding partner at Salama Silva Filho Advogados, and you handle complex litigation, and you also serve as an arbitrator. Can
that's
you
right.
discuss a particularly challenging case or arbitration you've been involved in and the legal intricacies it entailed?
Uh, well, I try to handle my cases discreetly and to adhere to my professional responsibilities,
Mm,
and frankly to avoid discussing details unless it's needed. As a general observation, I think that the key to doing well your job, to having some level of success, lies in maintaining the highest possible level of professionalism. So,
yes.
it's just this recipe that's well known. I'm not going to say anything different.
Okay.
It's you talk about what you're certain about and what you know about, and you
Yes,
prepare
yes.
yourself. If you don't know, you just keep quiet or you ask for some time and get back. In an arbitration, you have to prepare yourself meticulously for hearings in particular, and so the arbitrator has to review the case dockets and can't rely on the
Mm-hmm.
lawyers to provide the necessary information and
Yes.
so on.
Yes.
But it all boils down, I believe, to professionalism.
Mm-hmm. And in arbitration, do you have any conflicting, not any conflicts in terms of civil law, common law institutes, or conceptual problems, or how can I say it, discrepancies that are really that you really feel that are important, or that may interfere in your performance?
I mean, as I see, the role of the arbiter is to deliver impartial justice, and so, or professional justice, if you prefer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are canons and there are rules and laws that will govern, the applicable procedural law and the applicable substantive law. And you have, the conventions, the New York Convention, the arbitration laws, and so on.
A lot
And
of soft law, right?
and there's also soft law, but it depends on the kind of arbitration.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the arbitration, as I see it, is not the place to, major to exercise your creativity and so on.
Yes.
It's to doing the job correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So, and now let's just, before we wrap up, your pro bono work and your community engagement with the Brazilian Association of Supported Work, the ANEA, right? And this is something commendable. Tell us about it.
So, pro bono work is a nice thing when you can spare some time for it. I see it really as a lateral part of one's job, and I don't want to, overblow or exaggerate, because in the end, we're professionals, and the doctor lives off of people's diseases, just like the lawyer lives off of people's conflicts and so on. But to the extent that you're able and you believe in a cause, and people need your help and they can't afford a lawyer, I think it's something that we can and should do. And so this is a cause that I really believe, the one that's is sponsored by the ANEA, Associação Nacional do Emprego Apoiado, the supported employment, because it's basically creating, and so I've been involved in their efforts to obtain budget allocation. That's budget allocation that pays off. You have people that are born with a disability here and there, and with a small nudge, with some help, some training, these people can deliver. They can, and then it's good for them. Right. But it's good for everybody else. It's nice. It's not nice. It's just right to try to integrate, people that have small disabilities or even big disabilities.
Yes.
So they can, contribute to, let's say, society's welfare. And so I've always been very motivated by the kind of work that they do, and I've been happy to collaborate with them.
Yeah, that's great. Really commendable, Professor. Now, a final question. Considering your extensive experience, right, your success in the field of law, what advice or insights would you offer to current law students who are aspiring to follow in your footsteps, or what are the key lessons or strategies that you believe are crucial for them to succeed in both the academic and professional journeys? And I would also say in both civil law and common law jurisdictions, because they are, and about that, there's a lot in this question. I just wanted to know what do you think, or I would like to know your view on the civil law common law as really civil law common law systems, because of the statutes. There's so many statutes in the US, and in Brazil we have the civil law. We are a civil law, originally a civil law country. And but these two countries are also considered in practice today mixed systems, and I would like to know what you think about that. Okay, if you can remember everything. If you don't remember, I'm going to ask everything again.
So it's like two things, right? One is the civil law common law divide, and the other is advice, right? For, let's say, aspiring lawyers, students, and so on. So the common law civil law divide, it's a discussion about the sources of law, whether it's predominantly judge-made or predominantly statutory. And this is certainly true about Brazil. The divide is not as big as it once was, but it's still there because law is a culture, it's a practice, it's a craft. And so you inherit the mores and the ways of thinking from, past generations and so on. And so for me, the most, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the civil law, common law divide was in the year of 2004, when I started practicing law in New York. And I remember my first case, and our client was a credit card company that had some question about the regulations, and I really don't remember what the question was. And so the partner in charge of the case calls me to go to his office, and I sit down, and he tells me, so-and-so called me, and they want to know if they can do this or that. And I need you to do the research so I can write the memo and send it to the client. I said, sure. So what's the controlling statute? Controlling statute meaning what's the rule, the regulation, right? That we're discussing.
The main piece of legislation.
The main piece of legislation, right? And so he turns to me and says, Bruno, what the statute says does not matter. What matters is what the courts say that the statute says. And so you start by looking at the case law.
Great.
Oh, I understand the common law now. Now I see what you're talking about.
So interesting.
Because I had been in Brazil, right? I did banking law, in the very beginning of my career there. And we did have, financial institutions that would at some point call the law firm and say, can I do this? Or not can I do this, but, is this legal? Is it illegal? And so on. Help me figure it out. Yeah. And so how you start your research is you read the statute, right? That's the first thing you do.
The first thing we do.
The first thing you do, right? And then you do the rest. Whereas what I was being told is that that's not the first thing. The first thing is you look for the cases. And that was a teachable moment for me. So that's about that's as much as I want to say about the civil law common law divide.
Right, that's enough. That's great. From your own experience. Fantastic.
It's a gigantic question. Yeah. The other thing about advice. So I think there are many ways to succeed in life, and also many ways to fail in whatever you do, right? And so, if we look around, people are very different. People have very different strategies. People have different strengths and different weaknesses.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
And so you need to try to learn what you can do well and where the opportunities are. And then escape from your shortcomings, right? The stuff that you're not good at.
Yes.
Try to, not specialize on something that you're not good at, or at least something that you're not able to develop. And so it's basically listening to the signals that the world is emitting all the time, right? This is working, this is not working.
Yes.
Try to be open. And then there's a bunch of things. I mean, I'm sorry, I think I don't have anything too creative to say here, but it's really trying to listen from everybody.
Yes.
Approaching legal questions from a position of humility.
Yes.
Because it's complicated.
Yes.
You think you know, and then you see something and you don't really know. And every case that you face, it's a little bit like playing billiard, right? And so you have you're going to really focus on that ball, keep the eye on that ball, one case at a time.
Yeah, and sometimes no matter how much,
maybe this metaphor is a little silly, but it's really
it's interesting because you no matter how much how focused you are, sometimes things don't turn out as you planned. It reminds me of a saying from Churchill that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. So because we have to be we have to be patient with ourselves, because we fail, and we have to know that we have to be prepared to fail. I think this is one of the problems with this generation right now. The newly the ones who among the young lawyers who are leaving law school right now, this fear of failing, and failure is part of the process, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And I was talking about that the other day, and my son told me, do you know what is written up there inside the arena, the Roland Garros? They are inside the arena for when tennis players are playing. It's I wrote it down. So it says, victory belongs to the most tenacious. So victory belongs to the most tenacious. So and it's so interesting, because if you're not the winner at in that match, so you can think about, oh, maybe I was not that tenacious, and it's a bit comforting, because you can give more. So I think it is really, really encouraging.
But victory and failure are very relative.
And yes. This is a very important point.
This is always in comparison to what.
Yes.
And it's one nice attitude is to compare yourself to how you were yesterday. If you're,
that's fantastic. Yes,
right?
this should be the goal.
It's a little bit this timesheet mentality,
yes,
right? What
fantastic.
did you do?
Yes.
And that's what you try to do. These are your efforts. Tomorrow you'll try again. It's obviously easier said than done. Everybody has good days and bad days, disappointments and successes and so on. It's just it's this process, right? And also success and failure, however you want to measure it. The truth is, it does not depend only on you.
Yes,
and whether it's divine grace or luck or whatever it is.
Yes, and the circumstances and everyone around.
And the circumstances and everyone around. And it's, it's this loaded questions that in the end they have to do with the meaning of life. We're not going to solve them today.
Oh, yeah. Well, but it's profound. It was lovely. Thank you so much, Professor. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time and for you sharing with us all these incredible experiences. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Marina. Let me thank also the IASP. You mentioned it was founded in 1874, so if my math is right, that's 150 years ago.
Yes, yes,
which is amazing. And
yes,
I know some people at the IASP, and it's a great institution. And
yes.
I'm happy they invited me, and it was fun. Thank you very much.
No, we thank you. And we are celebrating, and this podcast, in fact, is part of the celebrations of the 150th anniversary this year in November. So you're here, we are already celebrating together. Okay.
Wonderful.
So thank you all for tuning in today's episode of The Global Lawyer. And we hope you enjoyed our insightful conversation with Professor Bruno Salama and gained a valuable knowledge from his expertise. And we appreciate your continued support and encourage you to stay tuned for many more exciting episodes to come. Don't forget to subscribe. We have this our here in our channel, YASP YouTube channel. Share with your colleagues and follow us on social media to stay updated on our latest content. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world of law with us. Bye-bye.